welcome to Not the New Normal. In today's episode, Martin and I get psychological and philosophical in equal measure as we explore the question, what should be at the heart of your business, your products or the people you serve? We may not unlock the mysteries of the universe, but I think we get quite close to uncovering the key ingredients to a business's success. I hope you enjoy the show. So today, what I've kind of dubbed our conversation today, people versus product. And I think what I want to look at is, typically businesses are organized around their products and services, right? So you go onto a website, you go look at their marketing collateral, you look at things like that. And front and center, first things first, this is what we do. And this is how we do it. And this is all the lovely stuff that we know you're going to want to buy from us. And that's kind of how things have been done for millennia, right? Since the very first traders kind of showed their wares. But that doesn't mean it's the right thing to do, nor does it mean that it works. My feeling is that things have changed quite considerably over the last, for decades, that things have been changing in terms of, when markets begin and products are new and innovative and there's only a couple of people doing it, then typically there is a good argument for putting that product front and center and kind of, knowing who you're selling it to is very important. But the narrative around those people is maybe less important because it's all about getting excited about this innovative new stuff. But actually, even as I say that, I'm starting to think to myself, that's not true either, because narrative and understanding your customer and all that stuff is important. So what we're going to talk about today in a roundabout fashion is how companies should organize and how people should organize their businesses, right? Around whether it should be around product, whether it's around the people they're selling to, whether it's a mixture of both. How's it going to work, especially when we're all kind of working within these very competitive market conditions. So that's kind of what I want to kind of cover. Why don't we start like this? Because it's always been fun to kind of break down some meaning of things. Well, in your mind, Martin, what is a product?
Great question. Really great question. So let's start examining it with two different questions back to you, right? So the first one is, what problem does the product solve for your audiences? And it sounds like such an obvious question, but it's the real fundamental thing that people miss, right? Because when literally I could reference many billion-dollar companies that have been clients of mine, both on the consumer side and the B2B side, and they've generally got a very functional meaning of the problem, right? We do clothing, we keep people warm. That's literally what I've seen as results of some really luxury type fashion type ones, right? So we miss out on the actual problem that we solve for people. So as an example, let's use clothing, right? Is that Armani doesn't keep people warm. Armani keeps people warm no more and no less than Donny does, right? But how are you going to feel if you wear, so it's Friday night, Alex, how would you feel going out wearing a pair of Donny socks and nothing else and wearing an Armani suit? What would be the difference for you?
The difference between just wearing a pair of socks and wearing an Armani suit.
Yeah.
It depends if I was on a stag do or not, wouldn't it? I suppose. But yeah, quite clearly, depending on where I was in the country, I would be at different degrees of cold. I went up on a stag do once in Newcastle, and it's freezing up there. But they wear very little, so that's obviously a personal choice. But how would I feel? I see what we're getting at here. I go out in an Armani suit. I'm going to feel good. I'm going to feel smart. I'm going to feel, and cool. I'm going to have a very different kind of. I'm going to feel very differently if I'm wearing an Armani suit to just wearing a pair of Donny socks.
Yeah, right. And there's the point, right? Is so Armani holds a quotidian of cool, right? If you wear an Armani product, consciously and unconsciously, you're going to feel a little bit cool, right? There's going to be a little bit of a swagger. It just changes your demeanor a little bit, right? So the problem that they actually solve is one of style and making people feel good. Whereas Donny socks, you're generally going to buy that when you've got a lower budget. It's a functional problem that you're actually solving. You need white socks, right? Or you can only afford white socks. So you see, the problem that Donny solves is very much about functional need, right? So it means that they're much more of a price and a value play, whereas Armani is much more of an emotional and style type need. So it's much more of a feeling and a positive change and what I call the science of cool type play, right? So they're both in the same market, but they both serve very different types of problems. That's the first part about understanding what a product is, right? Because you can apply that. It's not just about consumer. It's not just about clothing. You can apply it to everything. And we can look at some examples about that today if you want to as well, Alex.
Sure. Love to.
And then the second thing for me is, and it directly links to the first part, is what does my product mean to my different audiences? And the key part is actually not meaning, it's different audiences. So different people are going to take a meaning from, like, for example, we recently did some work on personas, right? And we were doing personas for a software company in the US. And we were looking at 5 different countries and 5 different job roles, right? So exactly the same product, but we were driving out what does it mean to HR in Germany versus HR in the US, in the UK, in the Netherlands, in France, right? So you've got different meaning based on the culture of what you're serving. And then you could take the same thing and say, what does this exactly the same product mean? So what problem does it solve for HR Germany versus CEOs in Germany? Because they've got 5 different types of buyers. So the meaning changes based on the audience, right? So you combine the two together where you've got your meaning in the audience combined with the problem that you solve. And that's you starting to get the truth of what a product is. But that's not how the world operates today. That's where the problem sits, really.
So, okay, so that makes a lot of sense, right? So the reason that somebody would buy a product, sometimes it can be quite functional. But I think even then, if you are buying white socks, and it depends on what you're buying them for, right? Because actually, if you're buying them for tennis, right, and there is a difference. I don't think you'd spend that much more on a pair of Donné than you would on a pair of Nike white socks or Dunlop, what have you. But, you might select the logo that's on those white socks based on your affiliation or how you feel about specific brands. So even down to something that is quite functional. I mean, even a toothbrush, right? It's a very functional item, but there's a huge range of toothbrushes out there, huge number of designs. Some of them are actually incredibly arty in terms of the material they're made of and the ergonomics of it and, how pretty they are. So it's interesting, even from a very functional point of view, this idea of meaning holds a great deal of sway, doesn't it, in terms of what it is that drives that eventual purchase. So let me ask you this, because I think that there's a couple of questions that came up to me based on what we've just been talking about, right? And one is this: what then, when you talk about what a product means to somebody, and I don't want to get really deep and philosophical, but when just from a kind of marketing stroke sales point of view, when we're thinking about meaning, what is it that we're actually measuring? What are we looking for in terms of what are the questions we need to ask in order to get a sense of meaning? Are we getting a sense of the feel of the brand in terms of how it makes people feel, or is it quite a complex issue that's wrapped up in a number of different elements?
I mean, it's definitely a complex issue ultimately, right? But then we're talking about through a lens of personalization and getting into like 16 different episodes of the podcast, right? Just to get to what personalization is. But to your point, you're absolutely on the money. Start with the feeling. Right, because we're in a very, very overly specialized world. And part of the reason why this problem exists is that we've lost what made us good in the first place about humans serving other humans, like the golden age of advertising way back in the 30s through to the 50s, right? So when we over-specialize things, it means that we make things more and more functional and practical and functional and practical and practical and functional, and you go on, and you're getting further and further away from understanding the feeling that your entire purpose is there to generate. Because if you can generate that feeling, that's how you get engagement, that's how you move people along the stages, and that's what ultimately makes people buy. If you don't manage that feeling, you can still sell, but you'll sell a lot less, and it's why your competition will be beating you. And then if you're all doing it, like what's going on, for example, in the mobile phone industry at the moment, it means that an entire industry creates a race to the bottom where it's just about price. And there's tons of that going on in the world. Like, when was the last time that you bought a consumer product that wasn't during a sale, right? Feels like there's a sale on all the time. So we've over-specialized the world to create endless types of sales,
So that's really interesting, and because my next question, it kind of feeds into that, right? Which is, do people buy products, right? Because clearly we do. We buy products, we buy services, but we buy them for a reason. And when I ask, do we buy products? I mean, do we buy a product for just because of the product itself? We don't, do we? We certainly in B2B, we're buying products and services not because we necessarily want an SEO company or are excited about the digital marketing company doing some stuff for us. What we want is some sort of result, don't we? And it's the association of what that product can achieve for us that's kind of spurs the purchase. And I suppose what's interesting in today's market is there's so much variety. There's so many options. We've got so many different people that we could be buying from, that suddenly the product becomes less important. And what becomes more important in terms of us as buyers looking at who we're going to choose is who the people are that we're buying them off, whether we believe or trust they can do what they say they can do, whether they've achieved the kind of result that we want for other people like us. So suddenly, and I think this kind of builds into your mobile phone example just before, that when we're looking at a mobile phone, those companies that don't have a particularly good story, or they haven't found a way of differentiating themselves beyond the functionality of their phone, they typically find themselves in that race to the bottom in terms of price. Right? The way that they cut into the market is by coming in with a very similar looking product that is X number of hundreds of pounds cheaper. Or they, as you say, people wait, they launch the phone and then people wait 6 months and then they buy it because they know after 6 months it's going to, probably won't half in price, but they'll get a decent percentage off.
Yeah.
But then you look at a company like Apple, and I don't know whether the Apple effect is still as strong as it once was. And I know it's certainly true that this effect isn't just with Apple. It does happen with other companies as well. Samsung and OnePlus spring to mind. But there are people watching Apple, waiting for Apple to launch the next product. And it doesn't matter that it's not a massive leap in terms of innovation. It's the next newest thing from Apple and they must have it. And it's no surprise that actually when you look at the mobile phone market, although there are millions more millions more different phones than Apple phones. When you look at Android, there are a huge number of SKUs, but Apple still owns around 50% of the market, right? So when we think about that, what is it that Apple's doing that's creating that desire that goes beyond the product? 'Cause the product is essentially the same, from year to year. There are iterative changes, but yet they still command attention. They still command huge sales and people will buy at full price because actually Apple very rarely drop the prices of their phones. Even when they bring out a new one, the older models still retain most of their value.
Yeah, I mean, to your point right at the start is that I think that Apple have lost some of its luster. I think that the reason being is literally connected to Steve Jobs, right? What Steve Jobs understood, two things better than anybody. One was in terms of that market, maybe in the entire world, was he had a really strong beat on human desire. Right. So Apple's entire communication strategy, and this is a key thing about selling anything, selling any kind of product or just selling anything in the world, is that they understood what humans desired out of the product. So they weren't looking at it like it was a functional product. They understood what the desire was, right? So they associated that desire and they created that tribal effect against Apple, right? And the second thing was that he understood that human control and, by context, usability was absolutely key. So Steve Jobs might not have got the best press about his behavior internally and stuff, but his way of producing product was second to none. Where you've got that loss of that luster at the moment is that if you look at the whole tech industry, so from mobiles to phones, like I know, for example, one of the competitors that you mentioned, we worked on them because they've run into a problem where they can't sell. They had this problem with 3D TVs, that the same problem they're having with 4K TVs. Nobody's buying them. Right? And one of the things we pointed out to them was that you can't experience a 4K TV on an advert on a standard HD TV. You can't experience the difference, right? So there's no optimization behind it. But the core thing that I'm talking about is that tech have run out of human needs. So the reason you don't get queues around the block around the Apple phone anymore is that just because it's got a little bit thinner or a little bit slippier, or I never believed that this would have been the case in Steve Jobs' day, the stupid lightning jacks that they've got in the Apple phones, I lose them all the time. They cost $12. I hate them, right? And they don't work particularly well either. My point is that tech's run out of human needs, so it's trying to pile tech on top of tech, and humans are losing interest because it's not about human need, it's not about desire anymore. The tribal effect gets lost in Apple. People don't replace their TVs as much. I've had the same iPhone for the first time for probably, 2 years, maybe 3 years. Before that, I would change it every new model that came out. I couldn't quite explain why. It was a slightly superiority, ego, wanting to have the latest things. I've got a problem in my mind with speed, so I want the phones to go as quickly as possible, right? But those types of things are great examples of where that lust has been lost. And you could actually, if we take it up a level and look at the things that have affected society and the world's behaviors in general over the past 20 years, right? So here's your variables. You've got the internet, you've got digital living, you've got software, you've got code, and you've got data within all of those things, right? And all of them are being run and enforcing behaviors of both the people that create it and the people that use it. They're all based on practical, functional, right? So to use stereotypes a little bit, is that most coders are not particularly in tune with other humans, right? It's actually the opposite way around. They're generally more comfortable, generalizing, but they're generally more comfortable being connected into a machine. Think about Mark Zuckerberg in the Facebook movie and stuff, right? When they were talking about being dialed in, stuff like that. You know what I mean? And what that means is that we've generated a lot of service and a lot of behavior that starts seeping out into advertising, creative, strategy, marketing, sales. That's very practical and very functional. And step by step, over the past 20 years, we've been moving further and further away from the feeling of product, from understanding product, from positioning of product. Now, don't get me wrong, I think the absolute utopian point ended towards the end of the 50s. That's when the golden age of advertising ended. And as you heard me say before, I believe it was the golden age, and I've got a lot of factual evidence of this, was because agencies, marketing agencies, used to employ psychologists as employees. Sounds nice. But what those psychologists were was the actual research. And their research was, here's how your audience feels, here's how to give them more of what they want to tip their decision making. So it was a very feelings-based architecture that made it the golden age. Ever since then, we've been ramping on capitalism with practical, capitalism with practical, capitalism with practical. So it becomes more and more functional and more about growth. And what do you get? You end up with a race to the bottom. Or take Apple, for example. Don't get me wrong, it's got $1 trillion in the bank, right? They're a killer company. But both of us, I think, are correct. They're just losing their luster a little bit. Sorry, that was like a total mini rant, but you asked a really good question, Alex.
And it was a really good run, right? Because I think you kind of really helped me to understand that kind of my the burbling that I was doing at the beginning. Because actually, it's kind of brought it into much sharper focus, right? Because the point is, if I'm right in what you've just said, the focus actually has come away from people and it's become far more focused on product. And it sounds like actually there needs to be a very good balance of the two if you're going to sell effectively or market your stuff effectively in today's world, right? You need great products because people don't buy shit products. I mean, they do, but they've got to feel that the product is worth the money that it's being sold for. But at the same time, you've got to be in tune with their needs and their story and how you tell your story. It was interesting. I've been doing some client interviews for a client of mine who runs a branding agency. And I was talking to a quite large home and garden brand. And they started off very much, they had some direct sales, but they were doing a lot of their selling through retail. They were doing a lot of their selling through marketplaces on like Amazon and eBay and all that kind of thing. And they realized that the future of the kind of the control, their destiny, was very much in the hands of these marketplaces and of these retailers, because they really didn't have a brand, so to speak. They have one, and the brand had equity, but because it wasn't distributed around the different public facing platforms that they were on, they weren't building that equity in the brand. And they realized that it would be very easy actually for other players within those marketplaces to kind of swallow them whole, because they could be much, much bigger and scale much, much quicker. So they realized that they needed to do some brand work. And what was really interesting was that they understood this idea of consistency. And I think this is coming back to what you were saying around Steve Jobs, right? That a brand isn't just the products that it creates. It is the people that it employs. It's the service that it offers. It's the stories that it tells. It's the mission that it has, the why, and how it connects with people. And it just feels that the brands that are winning are those that understand that need for consistency externally, internally, but also that at every touch point, there has to be that consistent storytelling, that consistent look and feel, that consistent quality, so that, because that's what people are buying into, because the product itself or a website for a company, you line them up and there's very little to tell between them. And it's very difficult to discern what it is that you really want from the thing that you're buying, because they're all saying the same thing.
Yeah, question for you, Alex, on that, right?
Yeah.
So before we started recording today, you were complimenting me because I sounded chipper. I don't always sound chipper for everybody listening to this, right? I was in a good mood. There's lots of good stuff going on. My team are crushing it at the moment, and we're doing a lot of hard work on bids, but it's good work, right? So you enjoy it and stuff. Thinking about yourself, Alex, what is different between you if you wake up tomorrow and your self-belief is really strong, or you wake up tomorrow and your self-belief isn't as strong? Let's focus on the positive. What's the difference in you when your self-belief, like your belief and trust of Alex, is there? What is different today, do you think?
You know, when I'm feeling good, when I'm feeling in flow, everything's easier. But not just easier, it's the quality of what I do is that much, feels that much higher. Whether it is or not, I don't know, but it feels that much higher. I feel like I enjoy my work more. The connection I build with people when I speak to them, everything works as it should. Now, when I wake up and I don't feel necessarily as good or as chipper, as you say, then the opposite is true. Now, I'm not a different person. I'm exactly the same person that woke up, but everything feels hard.
Right, 100%, right? So here's this thing. Let's forget about culture. Let's forget about value. Let's forget about that type of stuff, right? But this is what businesses miss out on. This is what Apple did fantastically well, was that they had everybody buy into what their mission was. And by everybody, I mean their employees as well. And this is where the capitalist world, so I'm not a socialist, I'm not judging it, I want to make a lot of money in this life, and then I'll probably feel bad when I'm on my deathbed and do some good stuff for my last couple of weeks, right? That's generally how it goes. But my point is that when you've got the belief and everybody buys into that belief, that's when the magic happens in an organization, because the magic goes into the little steps, right? It's the little bits of intuition, it's the effort that your employees make. It's the body language, it's the tone, and all of that goes into your digital life, into your social life as much as anything else. And it's permission-based psychology. And you mentioned it yourself, like being in a state of flow is just as true for an organization, and it's a psychological condition. Flow is such an incredibly powerful thing, because what you're basically doing is giving people the life that they want to know that they're making a difference. And most are set up with KPIs and measurements that do anything but encourage people to put that right type of quality into it. So don't get me wrong. You need to know the problem you solve. You need to know what your product means. You need to know what feelings your audience are looking for. But then you also need to give permission and make sure that everybody who works as part of your organization believes in it. Because if they don't believe in it, that's where you get like what people think is this intangible is actually really measurable and easy to understand. And that's just the belief system that you put into your organization.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think because I've been thinking about this recently, and I was talking to a new client, and we were discussing what kind of activity they should be doing, right? So should they be doing PR? Should they do some content stuff on LinkedIn? And all this kind of thing. And they're kind of looking for somebody who can offer this full suite of services, right? But they're really struggling. They really didn't know exactly what it is that they should be doing. And as we kind of did some work with them around who they are, what they do, who they serve, the value they create, the answers weren't coming. They weren't sure. I mean, I think they know, but it's going to take quite a bit more work to kind of bring it out. But they weren't sure. And so the problem with that is when you're not sure on any of those things, then you don't know who you serve. You don't know what you offer. You don't really know what the feel is that you create. And therefore, it's very difficult to communicate that. It's very difficult to connect with people because essentially that is what they're looking for. And it occurs to me that actually, because you're absolutely right? So it's creating the right feel and making sure people associate and buy into that feel. But it's about having that confidence, I think, isn't it, up front, knowing who you are, what you do, but most importantly, who you serve and the value that you offer. Because if you know really deeply and feel those things deeply, then any conversation that you have is going to be a very positive kind of, rather than thinking about, you're going to buy my stuff, you're not worrying about that. You're saying, tell me about who you are. Let me understand you better. And if there's a right fit between us, then I'm going to explain what I've done for people like you and see if that's something that you want as well. And I just think if the closer companies can get to understanding those things not necessarily the function of what they do, but more about who it is that they help and the impact that they can have for those people, then that communication is going to be much more effective, much more efficient. You're going to get buy-in much, much quicker because the people you're saying to are going to go, you know what, you really get me. And I like that. And it sounds like you work with people like me. And I really want some of that confidence, some of that, because they're kind of looking for leadership, aren't they? I want some of that confidence. I mean, isn't that why we buy into Apple, or people bought into Apple? Because they wanted a bit of Steve, didn't they? They wanted a little bit of that swagger, a little bit of that arrogance. They wanted to be part of this community he was creating, the values that he was kind of professing. Isn't that why we buy film DVDs after we've seen a film? We've seen it. Why do we need to see it again? Because we want a little bit of that in our homes. We want it there. Why do we buy branded merchandise? Because we want a little bit of that brand in our homes, because it's all about how we feel.
Right. Yeah, no, you got it. I mean, I'll share a little bit of, I can't remember if we spoke about this before, but whether we have or we haven't, just a little bit of IP from the model that I've built is gains and outcomes. So we humans make 35,000 decisions a day. Most of them are to say no and to reject things. When we do engage with something, it's generally because the brain's identified a gain or an outcome that we can get from it that's positive, right? So the Apple device in the Steve Jobs day had an associated gain with it. There was, every time you picked up that phone, every time you looked at that phone from the moment you purchased it, you're getting a little bit of a chemical release just by the association of having it. That's what Apple did. They understood the quotidian of feelings, and that comes with a little reward system in the brain, and the brain does little chemical releases. We're very addicted creatures as humans, right? So it's a huge part about it. That's what people wanted, was the gains. That's why we watch a movie again, because it starts to have an association with us, and we want that feeling. I mean, how many times have you watched Shawshank Redemption? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, loads. Because it changes our mood, doesn't it? It really has. I mean, it has that dopamine here. It gives us that chemical release, but it's really important because we can be really not in a great place and we can watch something like that and it can just lift us to where we need to be.
Yeah, and it makes you think about this from, if you're listening to this as a business owner, as a leader, whatever it happens to be, right? In order to get there, for what we're talking about. And Alex and I have been learning a lot about this. Alex, remind me, how long have you been self-employed?
15 years.
Okay, cool. So I didn't know that. We're roughly about the same amount of time. I'm just slightly behind you. I think I'm about 13 years, right? And the thing that I've learned now on my fourth business, right, and I've had two successes, one learning point and the current one, right, is that you've got to have a willingness to be personally challenged, right? And I'm finding more and more that the more that I'm a truth sayer And let me talk about this in stages, right? So I use the case studies and insights, and I've got a raft of them, and Alex has helped me with a lot of them in terms of positioning and stuff. And as ever, Alex, I talk about how amazing you are at it, because you're the best person that I've ever found, possibly the only person that actually understands how to extract the real meaning and feeling that sits within a piece of work that you've done for people, right? But my point is that I find that telling the truth is more and more, right? So you use case studies and evidence to get people through the door. But what's working incredibly well for me, and Alex and I are both going through different levels of growth in our business, which is really positive, right? Is that telling the truth is what really people are looking for. Because there's not a willingness to be personally challenged, right? This is like the road less traveled type narrative, really. The only way that we can be certain that our map of reality, the way we see the world, the way we see our products, the way we see our service, is actually valid, whether our reality is actually valid or whether it's a perception, is to expose it to the criticism and challenge of other people that know better than what we do relative to the problem that we're trying to solve, right? Otherwise, we live in a closed ecosystem. And that's how you end up with a fixed mind. If you're not willing to say, Alex, tell me what I'm not doing right. Tell me what I'm missing. Martin, tell me why I don't understand the product's feelings and stuff like that. And of course, I'm not just doing this to sell what Alex and I do. I'm just challenging people that are listening to this to say, when was the last time you validated what your perception of your reality is? Because that's where the gap into it. I still managed to slip in philosophy, by the way, Alex. I wasn't going to be deterred.
I don't mind. Love a little bit of philosophy in there. But actually, you've just given me a thought about maybe a nice little metaphor for the kind of client, the case study work that I do, right? And I want to test this with you, see what you think about it, right? Because a lot of case studies that I read are essentially orders that have been taken. So they're just a regurgitation of this is what who the customer is. This is what they wanted in terms of the kind of product they were asking for or service. This is the service that we gave them. And this is kind of how we got on, right? This is how the implementation went, and this is how happy people are about the implementation, right? Yeah. And the problem with that kind of story is it tells you nothing about what drove the purchase, why they selected that company in the first place, what it meant to them to enjoy that level of service, what the result of the partnership was, or the impact of it, right? Which are all the things actually that's the juice, that's the gold. You always talk about digging for the gold, and that's the gold, right? That's the stuff that you don't know because you've never asked,
right?
But it's the stuff you need to know because it's the stuff that sells. And I wondered if a good analogy actually is if once somebody's finished a meal, you could, to find out what they had, you can look at the menu, the menu, right? Or look at the bill, because it will give you an itemized list of all the things that they ordered, right? And that will tell you some things about your business, right? It will tell you what they wanted, how they kind of stacked them together, and maybe about something about people's tastes.
Right.
But actually, if you then spoke to those people and you said, why did you choose this restaurant? Who else did you consider, and why did you disqualify them? Why did you choose things that you chose? Did you enjoy them? How did they make you feel? Will you come back again? Why would you come back again? And what would you say to other people to make them come back, right? Those two things are very, very different. One will give you a very 2D feel for what people want. The other one will tell you exactly why they want it, why they didn't want something else, and why they might actually tell people about you.
Love it.
So so I think that works quite nicely. So as an analogy.
Can I tell you why?
Go on.
You're absolutely correct, and what you're speaking on has got a much deeper model of thinking behind it, right? So Napoleon Hill talked about he did a book called Outwitting the Devil. Right, so I recommend to anybody read Think and Grow Rich. Right, Napoleon Hill was the godfather of positive thinking and positive psychology and just finding the best life for yourself. Right, and he wasn't credited with that. He was just making it up as he went along. He was like the forefather of The Secret and stuff like that. Right, but there's also another book called Outwitting the Devil. Right, which was sat unpublished for 72 years for reasons that you'd find out if you read the book. It's actually an incredible story about why it wasn't published. So it's a make-believe interview with the devil, right? And it's talking about how the devil holds people back. And a big part about it is how it puts fear into the system, right? And what does fear do? It causes your mind to drift. It means that you're not committed to things. But above anything else, what Alex was just speaking about, right, is, and I would thoroughly recommend that you just rewind the podcast a little bit and just listen to step by step what he was just explaining, right? Because most case studies are stuck in fear. And fear is when we try and validate ourselves because we don't have the self-belief, right? So we try and validate our service. We say we had a good service, the service worked, the service was delivered. Whereas what Alex is talking about and what he generates is a faith-based system. And faith is when you find out, like your meal example, what was good and what was bad and what could you learn from that experience and what could make us better. And most people fear doing that because they don't want to hear what makes them better because it feels like criticism. And we're in such a blame-based society that everybody's running away from finding out from the truth. So fear versus faith is incredibly powerful. So what you're working on, Alex, and how you do it, and I know there's tons of layers behind it, but the headlines there, so powerful because it's a very strong logic. People want to hear about what's in it for them, what the gains and outcomes are, not you just trying to validate your idea to yourself. There's a big difference, and it goes back to that self-belief thing as well.
And I think it really does, doesn't it? Interesting, as you were talking there, I was thinking about what, fear and what it is that holds people back. And I know that a big thing that was always in my way, and it still rears its ugly head some of the time, is imposter syndrome, right? With this belief that we're not good enough, that we're just playing at it. I remember somebody telling me that Billy Connolly had terrible imposter syndrome, and just before he'd go onto stage, he would say to himself, you're rubbish, you're not funny, and people are going to find out, and you're going to be on there a couple of minutes, and they're going to start booing because they're going to realise you're an imposter. So it happens to us all. I mean, it really is one of those things where we think it's only us, but it is happening to everybody. And I think what's interesting about the process of doing that kind of case study that I was talking about is actually the belief that it creates, for both parties, right? It's really interesting. I'll do this interview with a client's client, and they'll finish the interview and they'll go, "That was brilliant. You've actually helped me think through my business a little bit. And it's been really good kind of talking through the project because I now understand what it really did for us and what the impact's been. And now I know what the direction I want to go in next, right? So I'm going to get your client back in again because there's more work to be done." So they get something out of it. But then I go back to my clients and I report back and I write the case study, and they're like, "Wow, yeah, I can see now. I can see what we did. I can see why it was valuable. I can see what they actually bought." So where I wanted to go is you mentioned the word before, and I think it's a word that's become more prominent over the last few years. And I think it's one of those things that people think they do and probably do, but how well they do it is another question altogether. And that word is persona.
Yeah.
And I think, there's a lot of us are bought into this idea that we need one. It's a bit like, I remember at the beginning of the noughties, right? Everybody needed a website, or they thought they needed one, but they didn't quite know why they needed one or what they were going to do with it, right? Or what a good website looked like. And I think we're kind of looking at the same thing around this persona work. We all know that we should have a persona, that the company needs a kind of a profile of a person that we're selling to in order to guide the way that we sell, the language that we use, and the products that we offer.
Yeah.
But nobody really understands what that really means and what good looks like. So can we have a chat about what typically people put in a persona, because I know that you've got a fairly strong views on that, and actually what they should be, the kind of stuff they should be considering when creating their personas or client profiles or customer profiles as they're also called.
Yeah, cool. Love this one. I love this one because I do have a strong point of view about it. I try to be a bit civilized and limit the swearing. But
if you could.
The biggest problem I come across time and time again is that people describe a person, not a target audience. So you could open any persona that you've seen, anyone that's listening to this, go and have a look at your persona, and it'll say something like, Dave is 19 years old and he's a backpacker from Venezuela and he uses Snapchat and he likes Samsung but doesn't mind Apple, blah, 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 right? And that's a typical persona that you see, and it ends up with two issues. One is you're describing a person, not an audience, right? So what you're literally doing is pointing the mind. So the people that could action the persona, you're pointing their mind to be way too specific, right? So you're making me think just about a person, which is not a market in itself. And the second component about it that is absolutely the biggest problem is that they're never actionable. So unless a persona's got actionable insights and describes a target audience, it's completely and utterly pointless. And I find that's, I mean, again, it pays me quite well, right? That's what we just a software client as well. So what they've now got is deep, actionable. Here's the language to use. Here's when to target people. Here's the keywords to use. Here's the titles to put on emails. Here's how to select the data. Like, it needs to be actionable. Otherwise, it's at best educated guesswork. But the first step for me is stop describing a person and start describing an audience that you want to target. How you find out that audience is another problem, right?
Indeed. So let's just look at that idea of actionable, because you're absolutely right? So a lot of personas describe a person very well, and you know what they do over a weekend and what their likes and dislikes are and all that kind of stuff. But doesn't necessarily, it's not actionable in terms of how do you use that information then to drive your sales and marketing, right? The fact that they've got 2 Labradors and a cat, you know, doesn't really do much for you. I mean, it might tell you that they're dog lovers and don't like cats so much. I don't know, right? So when we think about action, I mean, I've got my thoughts in terms of B2B. I'd be interested in your thoughts. When you think about actionable, what are the areas of insight that you need to identify in order to really build that picture of the audience?
So I think your point's really fair, right? Is that you need to look at how well you understand your kind of market in the first place, right? Like, why do your customers buy? And that's a dimension. We're doing a huge project with a large automotive company at the moment. Mm-hmm. I think it's a small automotive company, is there?
There are going to be very soon.
The point is that we're doing this with an automotive company, and we've got over 300 different reasons why people buy a car at different stages, right? So different types of meaning is what we're extracting. If you don't know why your audience buys your products in the first place, then you can't create personas. Because understanding why people buy something goes back to the problem, goes back to the meaning. But let's say that you've assembled all of those things. Let's say that you've got 50 different reasons. Then you can start segmenting that by different audiences. Because understanding the reasons to buy, and again, you give a great clue with it, Alex, right, is that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that somebody's got a cat and a dog, right, if the context doesn't match what you're trying to sell them, right? So the point that I always make about this, because personas are very much like the problem that the Facebook advertising system has generated, the programmatic advertising system has generated, the Google advertising system has generated, and it's actually a problem that's worth $265 billion a year of adverts that don't get interacted with. Can you imagine that? $265 billion. It's actually 98% of adverts do not get interacted with, right?
It's mind-boggling.
It's mind-boggling, right? And personas are a direct example about this. And the joke that I always make is that if Facebook knows that I dress as a woman on a Friday evening and I spend my Sundays running around my garden chasing squirrels, right? That's literally what Facebook and other platforms do, right? They're listening to my calls, they're reading my text on WhatsApp, they're doing all this kind of stuff under the lens of creating more personalized ads, right? Well, why do 98% of them not get interacted with? And it's actually a working app for Facebook. And the reason being is that there is no context to it. It doesn't matter that I have a cat and a dog. It's about how do I feel about the product that you're looking to sell me? What do I want from it? And it goes back to what problem do you solve? What's the meaning that's behind it? Because then you can get to actual relevant psychological data. Because that's really what the tipping point of any persona is. If you understand the reasons why different audiences are interested in this product, what it means to them, what problem it solves, then you've got a real actionable persona. If you don't, then it's coming up short.
I love that. And you make such an important point there in terms of, I mean, it's quite, as we say, it's mind-boggling in terms of the actual effectiveness of most digital marketing, most marketing actually, right? You know, the percentages are in, in the ones and twos if we're lucky.
Right.
And what that essentially means is that if you can crack the code, if you can fill that gap in the matrix, then think about the opportunity, because it typically means that most companies, no matter how big they are or how much money they've got to spend, they're missing out on 98% of the market, if not more, 99% of the market. And that means that anybody that can work out what it actually is that the customers are buying, why they're buying it, what they're buying it for, where they want to get to, and they can communicate that, you've got a huge untapped market.
Yeah, massive. I think that the way that you just described it, right, is it just left me. I was actually getting quite eager to get up and go and start doing some work on marketing and advertising. Describing something where this is the absolute truth of when you step away from product and start looking at your customers as real people and understand what your product means to them. The opportunity is abundant. It's huge. This idea that there's not growth out there, and I know we're hitting a recession, right? But it's about opportunity, because if you look at the world with the right lens on, which is not about you, it's not about validation, it's just one of belief and really making the effort to understand what your product means to different people. That's how you can set yourself free. And think about the past 5 things that you've bought. What did it mean to you? Why did you actually buy them? Because even when you take the most practical thing, like my pencil is broken, I need a new pencil, right? There's still a deeper meaning about why you bought the particular type of pencil that you did. It might be the cheapest pencil. It might be the most expensive pencil. It might be the pencil type that you got told by your grandmother when you were 9 was the greatest pencil in the world. There's meaning in everything, even in pencils.
Well, I agree. I mean, you say that, and I only ever buy one type of pen. And the reason I buy that pen is because I do a lot of writing, as you know, and before I can sit in front of a computer screen and start typing out an article or a case study, whatever it is, I write it longhand first in a book using a pen. And so that pen has got to be comfortable. It's got to feel good as I write, right? Because I'm, when I'm in flow, it's a very kind of emotional experience, and I'm kind of listening to what people have told me, and I'm trying to dig into that emotion, and I'm trying to transcribe that emotion into words on a page. So everything's got to feel right. So a pen that scratches, the ink doesn't come out properly, it gives me cramp quickly. I can't, is it illegible? And my writing's illegible at the best of the times. Is not going to work for me. So I am very, very, very particular about the kind of pen that I buy. But of course, most companies have never asked me why I buy the pen. Why I buy their pen. I bought hundreds, thousands of these pens, and I've never had an email asking me why. Ever.
And we just had, and think about what Alex just explained, right? So I'll do a psychological analysis of what he was just saying. Alex buys that particular pen because it gives him trust and it gives him belief, right? The trust comes from that is what he knows that is going to give him the best chance to express the emotions and the writing and the best that he wants to do. So you wrap that together, those two factors, and you've got loyalty, right? So if I was another pen company and I was speaking to a client about it, is I would be speaking about how you shift Alex's loyalty, and that's a huge component about product and meaning, but that's just already into the psychological meaning and stuff like that, and it becomes incredibly powerful about that. So understanding meaning is how you can shift people. And we just had an update. I think I mentioned this in the last podcast we did, Alex, about a jewelry client that we were working with, right? And we've done an extensive amount of work about understanding where they're positioned in the market and what their products mean to their audience, right? We set a new record. So bear in mind the click-through rate for adverts on Facebook is 1.61%, right? And that's what I set out to beat, what is now over 5 years ago. And we've got a 2-month average, so not just like a one-off, a 2-month average of 11.1%.
Which is unbelievable, right? I mean, it's like 10 times. What is that? 10 times? It's smashing that target. And just put that into context for us. How much work had to go into that? Was it a difficult process? Did you have to kind of wade through pages upon pages of psychological data? Was it tough to get to that incredible result?
It took time, but it wasn't tough because we knew we had the structure of what we're doing, right? So we're looking to extract the meaning. We're looking to understand the problem that you solve, and we understand what those variables are. Everything from price, design, to look, to feel, to imagery, to the words that you use, to the models that you use, all that kind of stuff, right? But it starts with understanding the meaning that you hold. And we've got 468 reasons to buy for that brand now. And we've got a constant stream coming in because we're asking the customer the right question at the right time, which is then giving us further reasons to buy, the emotions, the feelings, the problem we solved. And we're getting all of that with zero incentive. It's just about understanding when to ask people the right question.
And that's the point, isn't it? That is the point. Because when you know what to look for, you know what questions to ask, you get the data, and then you can have the impact. But if you don't know what you're looking for and you don't know what to ask for, you're never going to have the ingredients needed to create that result.
Yeah, exactly. You can't ever be better unless you ask people and understand what your perception is at the moment. It's the same thing for business is true for an individual, right? The lower your self-awareness, the less chance you're going to have to find the life that you deserve. End of.
It's such an important point, right? Because and I want to pick up on a couple of words that you said before: trust and belief.
Yeah.
Right. We have to have that trust and belief in ourselves, in our business, in what we do, with what we offer, in order to sell it effectively, and for people to believe us. And when people are looking at us, they need to have that trust and belief, and that doesn't just come in the functionality of the product. It comes in the quality that they perceive of that product, the quality of the service they perceive, the quality of the storytelling, the quality of the people, the quality of the insight that they're sharing, the quality of how well they believe they can see themselves in your business, right? So when they're looking at your website, when they're reading your content, how much of themselves do they see in that? How well do they recognize themselves? I've always kind of said that a website shouldn't be a stall in which you show your wares, because you look down the road and somebody's got exactly the same products. What a good website does is a mirror that helps your visitor see themselves reflected back, because the more they can see themselves in your business, the more connected to your business they will be.
Yeah, so it's what we call people like me, right? So, and that's not just somebody seeing another person, right? It's when, like what you said, when I can identify, so psychologically, just doing a reframe of what you're just saying, right? Because it's very, very important, is that psychologically, when I can feel an association, it feels like you serve others like me, that you get me. That's how you get somebody to commit to a brand, whether it's a new brand, new product, whatever it is. That's how you get association. And that goes back to that Apple Desire stuff. That's the thing that they nailed.
And doesn't that bring us to again, full circle to that kind of what people actually want from the world, from life, from the things that they buy. They want people to understand them. That's all we really want, isn't it? As people, we want people to get us, to see us for who we really are, so that we can be that person and we can feel confident about that. And essentially, isn't that what drives most purchase? To be seen, who we are and who we want to be.
Yeah, 100%. And the more that we can feel that sense of purpose, that sense of belonging. And that's why storytelling is such an amazingly important thing. But I think we can get into that in another episode for 100%. Yes. But it's one of the core 5 dimensions that make up humans being humans, is language and storytelling. So when things resonate with us, most of this, all these things that we've been speaking about, particularly in the last quarter of this episode, most of this is happening unconsciously. The unconscious mind is the boss of your emotions and your feelings and your relevance and your attraction and your engagement. But it's vital to be included into a service, because if it's not, then you're not going to get the engagement. So you're absolutely right, Alex.
So where I'd like to finish off is to kind of wrap up around what the question that I kind of posed at the beginning, in terms of when thinking about how to organize yourself as a business. Where do we think we're at? Is it clearly it's not just about product. Clearly it's not just about people. Is it about it all fitting together? Is it just about the clarity of who it is that you sell to and why they want your thing, and then creating a narrative that encapsulates all of that stuff? What would you say?
It's like a formula tick box, right? So what problem do you solve? Into the meaning, into the feelings, into how to build different audiences, different personas, make sure it's actionable, ask the right questions, keep learning from what you're doing, listen to your customers, keep refining that formula, and then you just go round and round in positive circles of growth.
Love that. It's all interconnected. It's not one or the other. Both have to satisfy this need for belief and trust building, the credibility that comes from that. And I think the word for me, I think that I'm really left with is this idea of belief. The more belief we have in ourselves and in our business, the more belief that our customers have in us and what we're able to do for them, the more work we're going to do, the more things we're going to sell.
Amen.
Brilliant. Martin, thank you so much. I love it because I have these ideas, and what you're able to do is ground them so beautifully in psychology and in real life and explain them in very simple terms. So thank you very much for today. It was brilliant.